I've looked at studies from numerous police departments, including the Bedford Police. They actually arrest and prosecute minorities for all crimes at a lower rate than they do Caucasian people. So the allegations that I keep hearing in committees and all over of like 300% minorities are proportionally treated, that may be in the rest of the country. It's not true in New Hampshire. Further, in New Hampshire, we make men and women of granite. They can stand up, and I don't care what my 3 neighboring states in Canada do. The majority of the U.S. is still against legalization. Question, just like when you raise water up in a pool, everything floats, everything rises, all boats rise. So too with usage. Every state we saw, when there was more marijuana in the state, there was more childhood use. One of my friends, Pat, is a resource officer, a policeman in Medford, Mass. He said the first thing they saw was the use of marijuana went to middle schools from high schools. So he said the main place that marijuana is now a problem is 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. Not another problem we need to add in New Hampshire. Another point is driving while impaired. They can't tell how intoxicated you are. It's a big problem. If you go out, if you were a kid, I would be smart enough, if I was going to use something, I'd use the marijuana, because they can't, when they do a blood test, there's no way to detect the level of impairment, such as with alcohol. They can know right where you are with your blood alcohol content level. So you're just making it more attractive to kids to use drugs, not what we need in the state of New Hampshire. Thank you, Mr. President.
I rise today in opposition to HB 629 and the amendments for several reasons. When I ran for this office, I made a pledge to oppose marijuana legalization, and I keep my word, and I still believe this would be the wrong direction for New Hampshire. But even if you are for legalization of marijuana, there are flaws in this bill. There are no guardrails or safeguards for our kids, our drivers, the public health, the safety of our residents, and our Second Amendment rights. I would like to address why supporters of the Second Amendment should oppose this bill. You wouldn't think a drug legalization bill would have much to do with the Second Amendment, but it could have the unintended consequences of taking those rights away from New Hampshire gun owners. Under federal law, it is unlawful for someone to possess a firearm or ammunition if they are an unlawful user of a controlled substance. Under federal law, marijuana is listed as a Schedule I drug. So these two laws together would make it illegal for anyone who uses marijuana to exercise their Second Amendment rights. For public health concerns, there are no funds in this bill to require a public health campaign to help educate our kids on the dangers of cannabis use. There are no requirements for the public education on the dangers of cannabis during pregnancy. Many may argue that alcohol is a legal drug, so why not cannabis? As a state, we control the sale of alcohol, we control who can buy alcohol, and very importantly, we control the labeling of alcohol so that the consumer knows what they are putting in their body. This bill does not have any safeguards around consumer protection. Who knows how much THC or other substances are in what our residents would be consuming? And as important, how will we ensure drugged drivers are not on our roads? How will we test? How will we enforce? What are the legal limits of a high while behind the wheel? Until we address these concerns, passing HB 629 and the amendments would endanger the right of Granite Staters to keep and bear arms, to drive safely on our streets and on our highways, and protect our kids and the health of the Granite Staters. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Ricciardi.
Position to Senate Bill, House Bill 629. As I've heard many times, yes, the polls want it, but when it happens to be election laws, polls are not good enough. Now the polls are good enough for us to make legislation based on polls. As my mother used to say years ago, if your friends jumped off a bridge, would you jump off with them? I don't care what the rest of the New England is doing. We are New Hampshire. We should do it our way. And the majority of the voters may want let's just say they do want legalization. However, they do not want a bill or an amendment that's presented to us at 20 minutes before we're supposed to be voting on this. Earlier this year in February, I had a Zoom meeting with Miriam Norman. She's a prosecutor from the state of Washington in Seattle, and she's had to prosecute some of these cases. They've had very difficult times in Washington, Oregon, and Colorado in prosecuting DUIs especially, because in fact there is no true way, except for a blood test, to figure out what the legal limit is. What she says, during this time we saw, she's talking about medical marijuana. During this time, we still saw THC DUIs. They were not easy as the legislator did not adopt a law until later saying a defendant could use the qualifying medical condition as a defense to a THC DUI. For me, I prosecuted many a THC DUI at this time before the law prohibited the ability to discuss the qualifying condition. This made these cases even harder to prove as the cases became about how you feel, how badly you feel for the defendant. Eventually, the legislature passed a law precluding the use of the qualifying condition as a defense. But with juries not understanding cannabis, it is an uphill battle. I've lost many a THC DUI at trial and hung many other juries on whether the defendant was impaired. She says, the most important thing to remember about THC DUIs is that an officer is arresting the defendant 100% of the time based on impairment. They do not have a mechanism to know whether the defendant had 5 nanograms or more at the time of arrest. They are arresting simply because they see impairment. She also had sent me a number of cases, and in some of the discussions that they had, they found that legalization of recreational use of marijuana in 5 U.S. states was on the average associated with 6.6% increase in injury crash rates and 2.3% increase in fatal crash rates due to DUIs. The effect of marijuana legalization on injury crash rates was more pronounced for the first 3 states to legalize compared to the later 2 states. The later 2 states had a long time to see what was happening in the first 3 states to be able to monitor. In Washington, in Colorado, Washington, and Oregon, injury crash rates rose by 4 to 14% after marijuana use was legalized, then increased again after retail sales began. Overall increases range from 8 to 18%. Defining marijuana impairment is not as simple as it is with alcohol. The impairing effects of both alcohol and marijuana depend on the level of use, quantity, and duration, as well as individual tolerances. But marijuana does not dissipate from the blood at a consistent rate. A couple of the other things that were concerning. National, state, and local governments considering changes to their marijuana policies should be cautious, proceed slowly, and take note of the lessons learned from those initial experiences. Policy changes regarding marijuana use must not hamper the effort to eliminate impaired driving, and oftentimes it does. So another question we don't have is, there are a lot of processes that need to be set up. SFST, Standard Field Sobriety Testing Training, is a 32-hour course that trains police officers to properly administer and interpret the results of maneuvers for use in driving cases. Do we have this? I don't know. The amendment doesn't say whether they're planning on setting it up. What is an ARIDE? Advanced Roadside Impaired Driving Enforcement is a 16-hour course taught by drug recognition experts. Do we have that? We don't know. A DRE. This was a major problem in Colorado when I went to a transportation meeting out there. The DREs were not able to, they didn't have enough DREs to cover the state of Colorado, so often the DUIs went down the tubes. A drug recognition expert or drug recognition evaluator is a law enforcement officer trained to recognize impairment in drivers under the influence of drugs other than or in addition to alcohol. Are ours trained to do that? We don't know. And one thing to think about, they have found that an increase in children ingesting some of these edibles. They don't know the difference in the edibles, whether it's a true candy or whether it's a marijuana or cannabis edible. And they found that in these states, oftentimes the increase in children ingesting them has increased and hospitalization has increased for them. So I ask you, please, vote this down. Let's at least get some thought behind a bill. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Gannon.
Thank you, Mr. President. Seems to be a proliferation of studies that are talking about statistics and data that are flat false. In every state where legalization has occurred, the incidence of death and overdose to adolescents has increased significantly. The black market has exploded, regardless of the methodology of legalization. And I'm going to cite some statistics for you. In the Journal of the American Medical Association on pediatrics, cannabis vaping results in increased risk for adolescents. Well, they're not going to get it. Yeah, they are. Yeah, they are. Pot being used in the home is going to get into the hands. You're going to create an explosive black market for the edibles. We're not legalizing those. Great. We'll have the edibles now competing with the smokers. This is a very poorly thought out bill, if I even was in support of this. Fact, cannabis use amongst 8th, 10th, and 12th graders exceeds alcohol use. Think about that. We're here on a rush to legalize a substance that has zero benefit to any segment of society. None. Not to adults, not to children. The statistics that talk about auto accidents, suicides, number of suicides in Colorado with marijuana present, toxicology report. 2012, the year it was legalized, 86. 2019, before the pandemic, 236 suicides. Marijuana produces paranoia. It produces other significant psychological effects that are detrimental. And over the long pull of using it, it unquestionably reduces your ability to decide, to make quick decisions. There's a reason that the military prohibits the use of marijuana and any drug. Why? It affects your ability to think. It affects your ability to react. Both of those are required when you're driving a car or a truck. Suicide toxicology results by age group 2019. Age group 10 to 19. 51% of suicides in that age group found marijuana in the toxicology report. 51%. Number of overdose deaths. Prior to legalization, 377. In 2020, 956. Traffic deaths related to marijuana when a driver tested positive for pot. 2013, 55. 2020, 131. Percent of all traffic deaths that were marijuana related were a driver tested positive for marijuana. Traffic deaths were a driver tested positive. 2013, 11%. 2020, 21%. 1/5 of all traffic deaths involved the use of marijuana in the toxicology report. 1/5, 20%. This is not a harmless substance. Legalizing this does no good to this aspect of this. In every state in which it's legalized, the pot shops have located themselves in the lower income echelons of our society. This is going to institute social injustice in our state because those who are going to get this stuff from somewhere, nobody knows where, are going to provide it to people that want it. There's no prohibition against giving it to others. So where are we going to get the stuff? I don't know. What's going to be any quality control? I don't know. Fentanyl-laced marijuana is out there, and it's killing our kids right now. There isn't a single benefit legalizing pot. The fact that we are New Hampshire and we don't and Canada and Vermont and Massachusetts and Maine do. I'm not ashamed of that. I'm proud of that. This is New Hampshire, okay? Live free or die, okay, should not incorporate the increase in traffic deaths, should not incorporate the increase in teenage suicides. That's spectacularly presented in the evidence over those states that have provided for the legalization of marijuana under any form, state-controlled, government-controlled, stores in towns, and so forth. Every single child advocacy, recovery agency, police department in the country, without exception, has said, don't do this. But we know better. It's all about the children. Teen suicides, okay? Explosive increase. Auto accident traffic deaths. Explosive increase, better than double. There is no possible good that comes from legalizing marijuana. Okay? It may be what people want. It's not what we as a Senate, okay, should enable them to do because it will cause harm. And above all else, when we make a decision, maybe that's something we should think about first. Do no harm. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I rise to speak against the amendment and against House Bill 629. I speak as a parent, as a grandparent, as a person who's been involved in public service for a long period of time. And I speak very fondly of the Manchester PD, which has done an outstanding job for a number of years in our city. I think they deserve a tremendous amount of credit for what they do. As a parent, you worry about your children. I worried about my children. As a grandparent, I worried about my children. I've seen the terrible effects that marijuana can have on people. The terrible effect that it can have on their brain function. That's been noted in journals around the country. That's a problem. I understand it's a problem. I understand alcohol was a problem. It still remains a problem. But this is not the way to solve that problem. The problem will be solved with education, with families taking responsibility for their children, their grandchildren, and people stepping up to the plate. That's what's going to solve our problem. It's going to be our interaction with people. We have a responsibility to do that, Mr. President. Each one of us has a responsibility. And with this piece of legislation, you all have a responsibility to vote your conscience. I understand that. But we have to do what we believe is the right thing to do. And in this situation, I believe the right thing to do is to vote against this bill and vote against this amendment. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. We've had a long and good debate on legalization versus not legalization. I'd like to focus for a minute on what's actually in or not in this amendment, because as I think it was noted by our colleague from District 19, I think there have been at least 3 separate versions of this amendment over the last couple of days, and this one less than an hour old, so we're sort of trying to do this in the dark a bit. And to me, for an issue that big, that's an issue. So what are the problems just in this amendment? Number one, who is going to sell the marijuana? Other states have dispensaries. We have medical marijuana dispensaries, but there's no creation in this amendment for medical marijuana dispensaries or some other licensed facility to sell what would be a legal product. There's no ability to raise revenue from that legal product if it's legalized. There is no quality control on that product if it is legalized. Other states, my understanding is, have THC limits. Certainly medical marijuana is a controlled, grown substance that people know what they're getting. What we are getting with this amendment is an open door to the black market. That's what we're getting. Up to 3/4 of an ounce would be legal. No place to buy it. You might be able to go across a border to Maine, Vermont, or Massachusetts and purchase it at a dispensary there, but most people are just going to buy it on the black market and take their chances, as our colleague from District 2 said about some of the infused products, marijuana products with fentanyl. Those are big problems. I'm glad that the sponsors of the amendment at the end put in the, I think it's called per se limits, that would give some sort of ability while driving impaired to be able to measure that. That's a little bit of progress, but other big things are not in the amendment. And then, since we've spent a lot of time talking about underage possession or use of marijuana, I think it's important to compare the penalties, et cetera, violations between alcohol and marijuana. If somebody under 21 is in possession of an alcoholic beverage, it's a minimum $300 fine. Cannabis, under this, a $100 fine. If you're caught while driving, a report for alcohol goes to the Department of Motor Vehicles, which can suspend your license. Under this amendment, there's no report to the Department of Motor Vehicles, nothing on your driving record. Transporting marijuana. For alcohol, a driver under 21 that transports alcohol has their license suspended for 60 days. Cannabis, exempted entirely, no penalty. Public consumption. For alcohol, towns can enact an ordinance that prohibits public consumption and fine $1,000. This amendment, $100. Nothing more than a slap on the wrist. Juvenile prosecution. If you're under 18 for alcohol, you go to court. But under this amendment, it would appear that any person convicted of a violation shall be subject to a delinquency petition. But it's backwards. The way our law works is you can't have a conviction before a juvenile petition. So there's significant problems just in the administration of this with regard to underage use. And I think we all know what happens with legalization. But to me, one of the biggest problems, our friend's amendment from District 19 had a section E in it that would have made it clear that a property owner could prohibit the use of marijuana on their property. That has been deleted. So if I understand correctly, it would be impossible for someone who owns, leases, or controls a property to retain control over that property concerning the sale, the use, or growing of marijuana on the property. So I don't know what that means, but I'm thinking of some of the favorite places that I love to go to. In my friend from District 1's district, the Mount Washington Hotel has one of the most beautiful verandas in the state of New Hampshire. You can sit on the deck, you can enjoy yourself. I like to look up at the presidentials, especially if I've climbed them, and enjoy the sunset. Could they restrict, under this language, use of marijuana on that veranda? Doesn't appear to be. So my friends, we have heard that there's a war on marijuana. That's what my friend from District 15 said. Let's talk a little bit of history of what's happened in this room. We made medical marijuana available. Not everybody in here voted for it a number of years ago, but I did. And I think it's been the right thing to do. It's now legally available. Some people complain about the price. I get it. It's pricey. And we've also decriminalized marijuana. I had great discussions with the ladies and gentlemen upstairs, the chiefs, about how to do it. They didn't like it, I'll tell you that. But we came to an accord of how to do it and how to do it right. and we did that. The problem with this amendment, for those of you who want to legalize marijuana, you haven't done it right. You don't have any structure for selling it. You don't have any upper limits for THC. The laws for alcohol and marijuana proposed in this amendment for legalization for under age 21 are problematic, real problematic. And then the property issue that I just talked about people being able to control their own property if they don't like marijuana, that's a problem. So for my friends that are thinking about voting for this amendment, it's not ready for prime time. It's got to come back. It's got to have a lot more input and done right. Now, I'm not advocating for that, but for those of you who want it, you better come back and try to do it right. And on April 27th, at the less than a month left in this session, we're running out of time. This is not ready for prime time. There's too much at stake here. Our friends have talked about the impact that it's had on motor vehicle accidents and suicide rates in other states. If you really believe that this is the right thing to do it right. This isn't right. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Carson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise to speak against the amendment and the bill. We've had this discussion for I don't know how many sessions about legalizing marijuana. And there's one part of it that nobody really wants to talk about. And that's the fact that this substance is illegal federally. The federal government has determined that this is a Schedule I drug. It is illegal. And every state that has legalized marijuana has done so in defiance of federal law. Now, we all have read our state constitution. We've all read the federal constitution. We all know what the supremacy clause is. We all know what it means. That the federal government is supreme. Their laws supersede our laws. But yet we keep trying to do this over and over and over again, when really what should be happening is the argument should be happening in Washington. And quite frankly, Mr. President, they did have a discussion. And they said no. So that left us right where we are today, trying to legalize a substance that the federal government has deemed to be illegal, because we know better. And quite frankly, it would be interesting to see where our federal delegation voted, how they stood on this issue. But one thing that really troubles me is that we are going to be putting our constituents, the people who elected us, to make good decisions on their behalf between federal law and between state law. And we know in that fight, we know who's going to win, and it's not going to be us. The people are the ones that are going to be hurt by what we do here today. Maybe they all smoke so much pot, they're not going to care. They'll be oblivious. But we care, and we should care about putting our constituents in difficult situations. But let's talk about some of the rights that are guaranteed to us. How about our Second Amendment rights? You sign up for medical marijuana, you lose your Second Amendment rights because of federal law. And ask people at the beginning of this program who signed up for it because it was their medicine, they've lost their Second Amendment rights, and there's no way that they can get them back again. So you have to make a decision. What's more important to you? CDL licenses for driving trucks. We don't control that. The federal government does. So if you get arrested, if you get a violation, a warrant, I don't care what it is, you're not going to be able to drive a truck because those licenses are given by the federal government. So there you go. Why do we keep doing this? The other question that I have is this body, not this particular body, but the legislature years ago decided smoking cigarettes are bad for you. They kill you. But yet we're here today talking about marijuana. It's okay. Go ahead. Roll them if you got them. Smoke them if you want. Why are we sending this message to our constituents? Why are we sending this message to our state's children? We shouldn't. We should not be doing this. We don't have the luxury of ignoring the law. We exist because if the people feel that a law is bad, we change the law. Maybe that's what the message we should be sending to our federal delegation. The people of the state of New Hampshire believes this federal law is bad. Overturn it. Get us something a little more reasonable. Instead of putting the state and its people in an untenable position. It's wrong. Mr. President, I agree with a lot of my colleagues here who said that this bill is not ready for prime time. And I'd just like to read something, an observation about the attempts to try to legalize this. New Hampshire has moved so quickly to change its marijuana laws that we are piling mistake on top of oversight on top of error. Rather than correcting mistakes as they bubble to the surface, we just continue to pile on those changes. We have a duty and obligation to the people we represent to pass laws that are clear and concise so they know if they're going to break the law, what the law says, and what the penalties are. This is nowhere near it. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thanks, Senator Carson.